Hello, everyone, and welcome to my fantasy football week 3 recap. Um, we had a pretty solid bounce back week this week, following last week's loss. Some of my players finally did decide to step up this week, but we will get into that a little bit later when I get more in depth about my position players. We were able to beat Royals by a score of 240 to 183. 240 points was by far the most amount of points scored in the league this week. And has been, or is, I should say, the third highest score in the league so far for this season. Now, 240, that's a lot. Especially compared to last week. I don't remember what I had, but last week was rather pathetic. So it is good to see my players step up a little bit this week. Now, going a little bit more in depth to my position players. Peyton was, Peyton. Could have done better. He threw an interception for the first time in like 700 years. But, sometimes stuff like that is just going to happen. But, Peyton had a solid outing, although he was outscored again this week by the opposing quarterback. Basically just because Kaepernick has the ability to run the ball. So, yeah, that's pretty much the only reason why. And Peyton also did throw that interception, so they had that. Now I'm going to get into my receivers who, wow, for once in like an extremely long time for me in fantasy, all three of my receivers had a good week. And that to me is just a miracle. My receivers, after me talking about them last week, actually showed up this week. Victor Cruz had a big game, over 100 yards with a touchdown. Came up with 21 points, almost 22 actually. Deshaun Jackson, back in Philly, also over 100 yards. Also had that 81-yard touchdown, that bomb from Kirk Cousins. He had 22, almost 23. Brian Quick from the Rams, who I actually decided to pick up about 10 minutes, maybe, if that, might have even been 5. Decided to pick him up before the games on Sunday. And actually came up big for me. It got me a solid 16 points, which was better than both my receivers that I had on the bench this week. So I put Brian Quick in there for Torrey Smith, and Brian Quick did have a 51-yard touchdown early in that game against the Cowboys, and then wound up having another catch as well. So he wound up with 16. Beast mode. Yeah, beast mode was activated this week after an unbeast mode like week last week. I could say he didn't have a touchdown last week, so he made up for that this week. He 40 points is is just simply monstrous. Gotta love having that beast on my team. He did wind up having under 100 rushing yards, but he did work in the passing game as well. He did have a receiving touchdown and a rushing touchdown. So 2 touchdowns this week for beast mode there. Zach Stacy, my other running back for this week, wound up with A rather solid 23 points. He did not have a touchdown, but was able to be a factor in the rushing game and the passing game, which is always good, especially in this league. Zach Ertz had a bad week this week. I'm not really too worried about him. He's been a huge part of their offense, and just there's going to be weeks where Ertz, I guess, is going to be left out of all of the targets the Eagles have, and maybe some weeks they won't utilize him as much. But this week was the first time this season that he underperformed, so it's whatever, it happens. Sweejum, another solid week for my kicker. He came up with 15. He's probably been one of the more consistent players on my team this year. Kansas City's defense had a big week this week against Miami. 4 sacks, didn't allow that many points. So that was good there. They came up with 20. The Colts were another late game time decision that I made. I did decide to drop the Steelers defense this week and pick up the Colts defense for the simple fact that they were playing the Jaguars. That is really the only reason why I picked up the Colts defense, and it paid off because they got me 28 points this week. So that was another 2 good pickups I had this week in the Colts defense and Brian Quick. Now going into my individual defensive players, Jared Mayo had another solid week with 14. Wound up with 3 tackles alone and 8 assisted tackles. Dansby, not as beastly of a week as last week, but still a rather solid week for him. Got me 8 points with 3 solo tackles and 2 assisted tackles. And Brandon Spikes, yet again, the low man on my team with 3 points only. I have actually already made a waiver claim to get rid of Brandon Spikes for next week. So that is that. Brandon Spikes will no longer be on my team after this week. Now, going into my bench players for this week, we had Torrey Smith, who is still struggling to get targets in Baltimore with Steve Smith there and all those tight ends that they use. Jay Cutler. Funny thing about Jay Cutler is I almost started him this week over Peyton. Was actually going back and forth between who I should play this week up until 4 o'clock, until Peyton's game started. And I decided to keep Peyton in, and Peyton did wind up outscoring Jay Cutler this week by 3 points. So that was good. Frank Gore had a bad week. He only rushed 6 times for 10 yards. Hopefully Frank Gore has a good week for week 4, because I need him in there for week 4 because my 2 starting running backs do have buys. Terrence Williams, solid 11. He did have a touchdown. That's really the only reason why his score is that high. Fred Jackson had a big week. He didn't rush the ball at all. Or is that wrong? Fred Jackson did have 6 rushing attempts for only 34 yards, but he was a bigger threat in the passing game with 8 receptions, 78 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown. Hopefully he can have a big week like that again for week 4, because I do need him in there. Danny Woodhead did get injured early in the San Diego game. He has been placed on season-ending IR, and I have also made a waiver claim to get rid of Woodhead. So, unfortunately for Woodhead, He is out for the rest of the season. And then we had DeMarcus Ware, who wound up with 6 points, thanks in large part to having a sack. So for the most part, my bench didn't really do that much, with the exception of Fred Jackson, who outscored Zach Stacy, but sometimes that happens. I do need Fred Jackson, Terrence Williams, and Frank Gore to be solid contributors for Week 4, though, because I will need to have them in my lineup. So far for next week's oh no, that's not where I meant to go yet. Since last week, I have risen from 7th place into 4th place in the league, sitting at 2-1 now. Also this week I did score 38 points over my projection, and so far for next week, without all of my roster changes that I will have to make, and I have 3 waiver claims which will go into effect tomorrow if I do get the 3 people that I have showed interest in. I am projected to win next week by some sort of miracle, with like 6 buys in my starting lineup. I'm projected to win next week by 1 point. So hopefully picking up these players can help me with that projection, because we all know that I am not a humongous fan of close games. They just make me nervous. So anyway, with all of that being said, I leave you this week with a 2-1 record in fantasy football thus far. And until next time, good luck, have fun, and be safe.